Welcome to Redbeard Radio. I'm Brian Keith, and today we are talking about data privacy, GDPR, how to follow the rules, and how to understand what risks you are facing in 2022 when it comes to managing your clients' data. We're talking with Chris Dodson, an attorney over at Cozen O'Connor. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hey, thanks. I'm glad to be here.
I am so excited because GDPR has been, how many years has it been now? It's 2 or 3 years, is that right?
2018.
4 years, holy smokes. So for folks who don't know, GDPR is the rule that says that when you're handling European customers or contacts data anyway, there's extra rules that are different than if you're just handling US data. And it was the first really big one of these things where now it's potentially huge implications, potentially huge fines. And it made us think about how are we handling our customers' data? How are we handling our email list data? That is as far divorced from a decade ago of, oh, you just say, well, I won't sell your email address and I'm fine. That used to be all you needed to be like, yep, I'm good to go. I got my address at the bottom of my emails. I'm set. I'm golden. But the world is changing and it's changing fast. And that's why we have Chris on the show to help us understand in 2022, what do we need to be thinking about as people who are sending out emails? We have customer data, all of that. So Chris, let's dive into the specifics of what you are looking at in 2022 when you are looking at the risks your clients are facing. What's coming at us that we should be aware of?
Well, so you mentioned the GDPR. That's obviously a big one. In the U.S., we also have the CCPA, the California law, privacy law. It's sometimes described as GDPR light, and that's not crazy, but it's substantially different. And then coming up, we have privacy laws for Virginia and Colorado that will be taking effect January 1st, 2023. So if they apply, now is the time to start getting ready for them.
Now, I hear that and I think, crap, am I going to have to learn 10 new privacy laws every year and go adjust everything to go accommodate the 10? Or
Yeah.
what is a comprehensive, because I have my own company, I have my client companies, I have a bunch of people that I advise on these things. And if I say, oh, hey guys, this month, go deploy your new Denver privacy law issues, fixes, what do you recommend for people like me who deal with a variety of people over a variety of geographies?
Yeah, well, so there's some good news and bad news there. The bad news is, at least for the foreseeable future in the U.S., we're going to be doing things on a state by state basis. That's unless the federal government passes a law that preempts state privacy laws. So that's the bad news. The good news is that at least so far, the state laws that have been passed apply a minimum threshold. So you have to have a certain level of revenue, or you have to have personal information for a certain number of people in the state, things like that. And they also, with the exception of California, exempt employee information. So they're really focused on consumers. The CCPA and also the GDPR do apply to employee information.
So let's say I have an audience all around the world of people I'm emailing. At what point do I have to really care about GDPR versus sort of ignoring it like a lot of American businesses are doing?
So assuming for the moment that a business does not have any operations in Europe, no employees, no IT infrastructure, it really comes down to, whether or not you're focusing any sales or marketing efforts in the EU. If you're really just targeting American customers and you have a few people who find you anyway from the EU, technically they're covered, but generally that's considered low risk. I mean, it's incidental collection. Now, if you're running targeted ads in the EU, if you're offering payment in euros, or if you're hosting some of your services out of data centers in the EU, that's a little different.
Let's dive into that one right there. So, are you saying that if I have a domain hosted by a company that is based in the EU, I now ought to be using GDPR rules for all my American customers that I email from that domain, even if the website is hosted here and I don't sell to anyone in the EU? Is that what I just heard?
Well, no. If your say your domain registrar is EU based, but you're
Hmm.
hosting the domain here, I don't think you need to worry about the GDPR just on that basis.
Okay. Sounds complicated, man. And it's just going to
Yeah,
get worse, right?
I would agree with that. Yes. Unfortunately, it is only going to get worse. If the federal government passes, a privacy law that supersedes state laws, then things will get a bit easier. Uh,
Hmm.
but until that happens, it's going to be very much driven by states and as well as the GDPR as we've been discussing.
What does it look like to move from our current reactive position where for a lot of my clients it's, oh, hey, so and so passed a new law, crap, what do I have to do now, to a more, here's our policy and we don't think we'll have to change it that much over the next few years because it's hassle and it's distracting to go keep on changing how we deal with customer data? Do you have a, I don't know, a white paper or a approach that you say this right here is the approach that works for people in general and is probably going to keep you safe from lawsuits for the next however many years?
Yeah, so the basic approach there is to identify the strictest requirements and focus on those. So for if you're only dealing with U.S. Privacy, that's going to be the CCPA. So
Mm-hmm.
if you comply with the CCPA requirements, you're probably going to be 99% of the way there for any other state laws that get passed. So if you focus operationally on complying with the CCPA, you've positioned yourself very nicely to meet the requirements of other privacy laws. You might need to update a few policies here and there, but for the most part, operationally, you're probably going to be in good shape.
What if the technology I use offers GDPR options but does not offer CCPA options? Do I just turn on GDPR and cross my fingers? Or is this a thing where you should be hunting out companies that specifically offer and have in their text that we follow CCPA?
I would recommend that they address CCPA specifically because there are a few differences that can come up. Now, if you're dealing with, say, a service provider relationship, so you are using a company to provide a service to you, and they're getting California personal data, there are certain specific provisions. There's contract language that you need to include with your contract with that service provider to satisfy the CCPA. That's not present in the GDPR, even though operationally a lot of the requirements are similar. But that specific contract language, that's not a requirement of the GDPR. So simply flipping the switch wouldn't cover you for CCPA purposes.
There's so much detail here. And stop me if this sounds familiar. It feels like a distraction for me. That it's not actually the core of what I do. What I actually do is I help people build courses, do marketing through emails. I do a podcast to help businesses grow. I have my Redbird Accelerator. There's all these things I do, and it feels like this compliance thing is, it's, I know it's important. It's like, yeah, you got to pay your taxes. It's a hassle. It's annoying. It's just this small percentage of your energy that's just lost each year to dealing with this, right?
Yeah, you are absolutely right, and that was actually, I would say, it's an implicit purpose in the case of the GDPR. I mean, it really does benefit bigger, more entrenched companies at the expense of smaller startups, and the business culture of the EU reflects that. It's very, very much focused on big businesses and not smaller businesses. Some people consider that a feature and not a bug.
Yeah, I have friends who do business over in the EU, and that sounds accurate from what I've heard from over there. Let's talk mitigation. If someone's listening to this and they say, wow, I'm really behind the times, I need to go read up on CCPA, GDPR, all the other regulations, and figure out what I'm going to do about it this year to avoid getting caught by surprise later. What's just the first step for a company that's not really sure what their current data policies are or if they're currently in compliance?
Yeah, so I guess there are a couple of approaches. One is if you're focused on doing it yourself, start reading law blogs. There's lots of law firms out there that blog about privacy topics, particularly every time a new law passed, or if there's an important court ruling. We all jump on that and publish something about it. Those are great resources. If you're less focused on doing it yourself, I would say connect with a good attorney with privacy experience. There's a lot more very good business attorneys. There's fewer, I would say, experienced privacy attorneys. We're definitely out there, and there's a growing number of us. But I would say find a good lawyer that you can work with who has privacy experience, and they will steer you in the right direction.
Now, when I hear lawyers, I start thinking about how much this is going to cost me, which means now I'm thinking about, well, what risk am I actually avoiding by talking with a lawyer before I get involved in any kind of fines or litigation or whatever else? What's your guess about CCPA, GDPR, about all those? Are we already seeing fines for people not complying? Do you think that we're going to be seeing more of that hitting the 7 and the 6 figure business market?
Yeah, so we are definitely starting to see the EU ramp up enforcement. Um, Thus far, it has definitely been focused on bigger companies.
Mhm.
There's no doubt. Um, in the U.S., California uh, amended the CCPA, and they're adding their own data privacy regulator. So that's on the horizon, and they will have enforcement authority, and I think we can expect to see some fines coming out of them at some point in the not too distant future. Um, and of course, there's also private lawsuits as well. Now, the lawsuits available in the U.S. are a little more. I'll say that they're somewhat limited for privacy purposes, but of course, plaintiffs' attorneys are very creative, and they will come up with any angle they can. So there is definitely a risk out there.
Let's get really specific here. There's all these laws that cover a huge amount of different things, but can you give me an example of what let's say 6 figure business owner, I handle client data. I have customers who I have service clients, I have product clients, and I have an email list. That's the kind of data I'm working with. What's the specific kind of lawsuit that I might be facing that might be scary enough that I do want to go talk to an attorney about getting my system to be more in compliance to prevent that kind of lawsuit from being successful?
Yeah. So even setting aside the newer state privacy laws, we have things like the Federal Trade Commission's privacy regulations, the CAN-SPAM Act as well. Um, under the FTC, the somewhat traditional approach was with a privacy policy, say what you do and do what you say. Uh, it's a little more complicated than that now. But certainly that basic approach is good. But if you're saying things in your privacy policy that aren't correct, or that omit things that say might not be expected by your average web surfer, then there's some concerns. And I'll give you an example. We have a number of clients that are using, call it session recording technology. Are you familiar with that?
I think I know what you're talking about, but for folks who don't know, can you tell us what you're talking about?
Yeah, so it's basically it's a technology you can build into your website that essentially recreates the actions that a user takes on a web page.
Mhm.
So their scrolling, their mouse movements, the things that they type. It appears when you go to view the recording, it looks like somebody was just had a video camera
Mhm.
over the person's shoulder and records everything that they do on the website. So there is strangely very little guidance
Hmm.
from the companies that provide this service about disclosures that you need to make in your privacy policy if you're using this. Well, we have seen some lawsuits about that not being disclosed adequately to site visitors. Um, that's a I've seen some growth in those lawsuits
Hmm.
because that type of tool is becoming a lot more common. And I've been, frankly, a lot of times I'll go to a site and I'll look for disclosures about it, and I'm not seeing them. Um, so if you're using that type of technology, that is definitely something you want to be careful about. I'm not saying don't use it. I'm just saying account for it in your privacy policies.
Now I wish we had an iOS expert on the call to talk to us about the iOS changes and how that relates to people using different software, because Apple's disabling a lot of the tools that we used to use to understand what our customers are doing. And so all the new
Yeah,
tools we're
yeah.
doing, now I'm like, man, gotta have Chris and whoever this iOS expert is talk about, okay, that you might want to use this new tool to save yourself so you still can track all your ad spend, but good luck because it has to actually be in your privacy policy or you're exposing yourself to liability. It's complicated.
It
Chris,
is.
Chris, uncomplicate it for us.
That is the key takeaway of privacy law. Unfortunately, it's complicated, and if you're out there trying to build a good customer base, the chances of you're finding a gray area where it's just not really clear what's required by privacy law is very high. It's amazing how many clients we have that just seems like they've designed things that find the crevices perfectly.
Okay, enough doom and gloom. Take us to the light and the happy place in which we are less at risk of lawsuits. Chris, how can folks get in touch with you about some kind of audit or some kind of how screwed am I assessment of all of our systems?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, I'm at Cozen O'Connor. If you go to cozen.com, Cozen.com, and just look for my last name, Dodson, Dodson, under the people section, I'll show up pretty quick. Happy to chat with anybody. We can take a look at their business and their processes and their data and figure out what's required to make sure they don't find themselves on the wrong end of a lawsuit or the wrong end of a regulatory proceeding.
Beautiful, Chris. And for folks who want to call Chris right now, the number on the website is 215-665-2174. In case you've listened to this and you thought, ah, crap, I have a big liability that I was ignoring because it's not comfortable to look at. That's the number to call to go to get it dealt with. Right now, it's going to be a fun year, Chris, in data privacy, just like every year. Thank you so much for being on Redbird Radio. And one last thing is, if people want to follow you on social media, where's the best place to find you?
So I'm on Twitter. Dodson C is my handle.
Wonderful.
That's
Dodson C.
probably the best, and LinkedIn as well, obviously.
Fantastic. LinkedIn, that's Christopher Dodson ESQ on LinkedIn.
That is correct.
Chris, thanks for being on Redbeard Radio.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Anytime.